Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 26 of my 2020 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using a whole bunch of Lawn Fawn sets, including Cheery Christmas, Oh Gnome, Frosty Fairy Friends, Christmas Fishes, and You Are Sublime. So I stamped out all my images on some Neenah Solar White cardstock in two different shades of ink. I used Jet Black for the images that I'll be coloring and Manatee for the ones that I'll just be die cutting as they are. So I'm going to start with the Copic Coloring, and I'm going to pull out some colors for my squirrels. I'm doing a cute little scene featuring some red squirrels today, which are my favorite. They're one of my absolute favorite animals. And so I am using E11, E13, E15, E17, and E19. So I'm using the darkest three shades for the majority of their bodies, and then I'll use the lighter two shades for just a few accent areas like the belly. So I use the E19 to lay in some shadows first, and I'm doing a center light source, so the shadows are going to be on the backs of these little squirrels' bodies, and then the highlight on their faces. Once I had my shadows laid in, I blended that out with the E17, and now I'm using the E15 to kind of fill in the rest of the space that I wanted to be in that darker color. And then I will bring in the E13. I'm going to hit the highlights on their ears and the face, and I'm going to make a transition shade into that belly area. I'll also add a little bit of that to the top of the tail, and then I'll use the E11 to fill in the rest of that white space. For the second squirrel, which I'm calling the girl squirrel since she's got a little bit of eyelash showing on her winky eye there, I'm going to color her exactly the same, but I'm going to flip my light sources like I mentioned. Since she is facing toward the left, her shadows are going to be on the right hand side of her body, and then the highlight will be on the left. And that just helps to keep the face nice and light. I've said this lots of times before, but the features of the face are what gives it the personality. So having those be your lightest area is just going to make your critters look even that more alive. It's just going to make them kind of come to life on the page there. So again, I just started with those darker shades and blending toward the front, using that E13 to create the transition between the two and also fill in a few little highlights on the ears and face and tail, and then filling in that belly with the E13, which I feel like gives them a lot of dimension. I'm moving on to the little acorn. That's going to be the gift that they are kind of sharing in this little scene. I'm using E41, E42, E43, E44, and E47, but I'm just using the darkest three shades on the cap and then the lighter three shades on the bottom. So I just pulled them all out at once. That's why it looks like so many colors, but each area was still only three shades. So the E43 is my lightest for the cap and my darkest for the actual nut. And then for my reds, I'm using R24, R29, and R39. I'm going to color all of my mushroom caps exactly the same, starting with that E39 for that deep shadow, and then blending out with the R29, which is such a nice bright red, and then the R24 gives it that little bit of a glow for a highlight. I'm going to color all of them exactly the same. I wanted to keep my color palette very simple on today's card. Sometimes I like to pull out all the colors, and other times I like to really challenge myself with a very simple color palette and just see what cool things you can do, because it makes you think outside the box. It makes you maybe color things in a way that you normally wouldn't because your options are limited, and I always love the way it turns out. So today's color palette is going to be red, white, gray, and brown, and that's it. And I just thought it would be something a little bit different for Christmas, and I don't know, there's something about that limited color palette just just makes it so pleasing to the eye. So that's what I'm doing today. I decided to keep my light source on the mushrooms all the same, so they all have the shadow on the right and the highlight on the left. And that was just because most of them are kind of tipped more towards the left, but the one that's tipped toward the right is going to have a squirrel sitting on top of it, so that they would be casting a shadow. I also use these shades to color in the bow on top of the little nut. And then for the mushroom base, I'm using E70 and E71. I just used the E71 as my darkest, blended out with the E70, and then I went back and added a bit more of that E71 to just create a little more contrast. And then for the white areas, I used W00 and W1, and I also used a little W00 in the spots, the white spots on the mushrooms. And then I trimmed these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I'm taking these stitch scalloped rectangle frames and I'm going to remove the frame for now, and from that center piece I'm going to die cut a snowy hill using the stitch hillside borders, just taping that in place with a little bit of post-it tape. I'm going to set the bottom aside, and the top I'm actually going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to smear ink directly from the ink pad onto that background to create a different look. So I'm starting with Lawn Fawn Hippo ink, and I know that looks really dark right now, but remember that these inks dry back quite a bit. So I'm also going to take some Manatee ink and kind of layer those two over top of each other. So I wanted also to have a little bit of snow on that background, so you can see how much it's already starting to dry back and it's not even done yet. But I'm taking some Copic opaque white and I'm going to water that down just a little bit, and then I will mix that up on an acrylic block and flick that over that background to create some snowfall. I'm going to set this panel aside to dry, and in the meantime I will work on my sentiment. So I'm going to pop that snowdrift into my MISTI, and the sentiment I'm using is from the Merry Messages stamp set. So I'm stamping using that Hippo ink again, that's the darker of the two grays on the background, and I'm using the sentiment that says Happy Holidays because it just fit perfectly in that space. And then I will pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using a piece of narwhal cardstock. And I'm going to take a squirrel from Let's Go Nuts. It's the one that is like sleeping with a few little nuts there, and another sentiment from Merry Messages that says, Have yourself a merry little Christmas. And I stamped that a whole bunch of times so that it would show up even after it dries back. Now I'm going to take the 3 different pieces from my focal panel, that frame, and then the 2 insert pieces that I die cut apart, and I'm going to line them up from the back and tape them into place with a little bit of clear Scotch tape. That top piece did get warped quite a bit because that was a lot of ink going on there at once, but I kind of just bent it back to eliminate some of that warping and then taped them together separately. That way the first piece was already nice and flat, that bottom part, and I was able to tape the top part to it. So all of that tape is going to hold it together, and then I'm also going to line the back with some foam tape, and that's going to make it lay nice and flat as well. My pattern paper is from the Let It Shine collection from Lawn Fawn, and this red and white stripe was definitely my most used print from that pad this year. And I just had this little piece left over, but it ended up working out perfectly. So I just lined that up in the center of the card. And now I'm peeling off the release papers from the foam tape on that focal panel. And then I'll line that up in the center and pop that down into place. And now I'm ready to start adhering my images. So I'm going to pull out my squirrels. And first I'm going to take the 2 mushrooms that I want them to be sitting on top of. So I have this taller one that's leaning a little bit toward the left, And then I have this shorter one that's leaning toward the right. These are the only two that don't have snow covering the tops, but that's because the squirrels are sitting on them, so the snow wouldn't be collecting there. So I'm going to add the little girl squirrel over on the right mushroom and then the little boy on the left one, so they can be facing each other. And then I'll also have that little nut, and they're going to be sharing that, so I'll kind of have it so that they're both holding on to it. So I'm going to adjust them really quick while I'm using that liquid glue and just make sure that it looks like it's in both of their hands. And then I can start filling in the foreground. So I'm going to take some more of these little mushrooms, but these ones have the snow collecting on the top, and get those placed where I wanted them. Again, I'm going to go on the left and right. I'm trying to be a little bit symmetrical with this scene here. Because I also just think it really adds to that simple look with the simple color palette, and then the symmetrical placement of items kind of just pulls your eye towards the center and focuses in on those two little squirrels. So I'm filling in some of the little spaces with these pine boughs that I stamped in the manatee ink, and just kind of figuring out where I want everything to go. I didn't know if I wanted anything behind the squirrels, but I decided that would kind of take away from them, and I didn't want anything kind of up near them. So I'm keeping all of the rest of the items pretty low on the card. And then I've got these little, well, they're seagrasses technically because they're from those You Are Sublime and the Christmas Fishes set, but I just thought they could look like little vines and things that would be out in the forest. So figuring out the placement for those, and again I decided to work down rather than up on this little scene. So I'm coming towards the middle, just above that sentiment. And to be honest, I'm not really sure whether I might have liked it a little bit before I added these final images in the center, but I just felt like there was too much white space there. Otherwise, I would have had to move some of the other items down, like those mushrooms and the pine boughs. But anyway, I did fill this in. You guys can tell me whether you liked it better before or after, but I thought that just kind of filled in that foreground nicely and took up some of that space. I don't know, I have a problem with blank space. I just feel like everything needs to be filled in. But anyway, I added one more of those little seagrasses just to kind of mix things up, and then did some final adjustments. That's why I really enjoy using liquid glue to put together my scenes, because you have that little bit of wiggle room to get things just where you want them before they dry permanently. And then of course I had to add some Stardust Stickles. At this point, this is practically my signature embellishment. Other girls have signature perfumes, but no, for me I have a signature embellishment, and it is this Stickles glitter glue, because I just can't seem to make a card without it. But I mean, it is just so gorgeous. It's the perfect subtle finishing touch. So I added it to the snow on the snow-capped mushrooms, and then I also decided to kind of use very thin amounts to accent the little gray pine boughs and the little vines, just with a little dot on those vines on the very tips, just to give them something. And then I also put it on the bow on the little gift of the acorn. And I put a few little drops in the background for some more glittery falling snow. So I'm going to lift that up to the camera so you can see how that Stickles catches the light. I think it's just so pretty and perfect for Christmas cards. There's another peek at the inside. This card will actually be on the Lawn Fawn blog today, so I'll have a link to that post down below if you're interested in checking that out. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe and ring that notification bell. That all helps me out so much. If you're interested in any of the products that I used today, you can find those listed and linked below the video in the description bar. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos from previous years of holiday card series that you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye-bye.